Hi, this is Lee from the Law School Toolbox and the Bar Exam Toolbox. Our podcast is supported by SpaceRepetition.com. Want to remember critical areas of law that you'll be tested on for your finals, the MBE, or the Next Gen? Join 30,000 others using SpaceRepetition.com's scientifically proven method. 15% off any prep materials at checkout with code TOOLBOX. Welcome back. Today, we are continuing our discussion on criminal identification procedures in Part 2 of our Listen and Learn series. In Part 1, we covered the key rules surrounding criminal identification procedures, including when the Sixth Amendment right to counsel applies, and how to analyze potential 14th Amendment due process violations. We also analyzed a hypothetical involving a courthouse identification. Before we dive in to our second hypothetical, let's quickly review the two-part test for analyzing potential due process violations in identification procedures. First, we ask whether the identification procedure was unnecessarily suggestive. Second, if it was suggestive, we ask whether that suggestiveness created a substantial likelihood of irreparable misidentification. Remember that courts look at the totality of the circumstances when making these determinations. Some factors that might make an identification procedure unnecessarily suggestive include 1. The subject standing out from others in a lineup, different clothing, height, build, etc. 2. Officers making comments that point to a specific person. 3. Using a show-up when a lineup would be feasible. 4. Prior exposure of the witness to photographs or descriptions that might influence their choice. When evaluating whether suggestiveness led to a substantial likelihood of misidentification, courts often consider factors like these: the witness's opportunity to view the criminal at the time of the crime, the witness's degree of attention during the crime, the accuracy of the witness's prior description, the level of certainty demonstrated by the witness, the time between the crime and the identification. Now let's apply these principles to another hypothetical to further develop our understanding. This example is based on an October 2020 California bar question. Yep, the COVID bar exam. This question is modified from the original. Vic's house was robbed one night while Wanda happened to be walking by. Wanda caught sight of two men running out of the house. The same night, Wanda described one of the men to the police as tall, clean-shaven, with short hair, and could only state that the other man was short. 3 weeks later, David, who is tall, and Al, who is short, were arrested for the robbery. The next day, a newspaper printed a recent photo of David, identifying him as a suspect in the robbery, and showing him with a large beard and long hair. When Wanda saw the photo in the newspaper, she immediately went to the police station and told Officer Oliver that she was concerned that David might be the wrong man. Officer Oliver told Wanda that David had Vic's wallet in his pocket when he was arrested. Before David was arraigned, Officer Oliver arranged for Wanda to view a lineup of 6 bearded men with long hair, including David. 3 of the men were considerably shorter than David. After viewing the lineup for 20 minutes, Wanda identified David as one of the men she saw running out of the house. During his trial, David has moved to suppress Wanda's identification based on the 14th Amendment Due Process Clause. Should the court grant the motion? Going back to our rule for determining whether an identification violates the defendant's right to due process under the 14th Amendment, we look at whether, based on the totality of the circumstances, the identification is so unnecessarily suggestive that it results in a substantial likelihood of irreparable misidentification. To show that the lineup was unnecessarily suggestive, David would argue that the photograph published in the paper influenced Wanda to identify David, even though he did not match her initial description. This is because Wanda would be more likely to recognize David in the lineup based on the picture rather than her memory of the night of the robbery. David would also point to Officer Oliver's statement that David had Vic's wallet on him at the time of the robbery. Hearing this statement would make Wanda more likely to identify David in the lineup after recognizing him from the photo in the newspaper, because David's possession of Vic's wallet suggests that David stole it from Vic and therefore was also one of the people who committed the robbery. Also, the lineup wasn't uniform here. The police included several men that were significantly shorter than David, even though they all had long hair and a beard. The difference in heights could easily help Wanda eliminate some of the men from consideration, again making it more likely that she would identify David. To establish that this unnecessarily suggestive lineup created a substantial likelihood that Wanda would identify the incorrect person, David could point to the fact that Wanda's initial description of the suspect, tall, short hair, and clean-shaven, was not consistent with the person she identified in the lineup. David would also want to emphasize that she viewed the lineup for 20 minutes, which suggests she wasn't certain of her suggestion. David should also emphasize that on the night of the robbery, Wanda viewed the men from the street in the dark for a very short time as they fled from the house, and she couldn't give a detailed description of both men. These factors suggest her initial observation wasn't reliable, and given that, despite her concern that the police had the wrong person, she ended up identifying someone who matched the photo in the newspaper. The totality of the circumstances indicate that there was a substantial likelihood that she would misidentify the perpetrator. The prosecution doesn't have very strong arguments here. They could argue that the lineup was not unnecessarily suggestive because the 6 men had beards and long hair, so they had similar characteristics even if they weren't all the same height. And they could try to claim that Wanda's identification was reliable because she was able to take her time, 20 minutes in fact, to really consider whether the person she saw was in the lineup. However, the court would likely find that the combination of the newspaper's influence, Officer Oliver's comments, and the differing heights of the men in the lineup created an unnecessarily suggestive identification procedure. And all the factors that David highlighted around the circumstances surrounding Wanda's initial observation, her description, and then her identification support the conclusion that the unnecessarily suggestive lineup resulted in a substantial likelihood of irreparable misidentification. So here, David would probably be successful in having the lineup identification suppressed. So let's take a moment to contrast our two hypotheticals. In the first case with Dawn and Wes, the show-up was found not to be unnecessarily suggestive, even though it occurred in the courthouse. This is all part of Part 1. The spontaneous nature of the identification and the witness's confidence were key factors. In the second case with David and Wanda, the lineup was deemed unnecessarily suggestive largely because of Officer Oliver's comments and the disparate heights of the participants, combined with the fact that Wanda had expressed doubt about David's identity. These hypos also highlight the critical importance of when a witness's first impression is formed. In Wanda's case, her initial description immediately after the crime, tall, clean-shaven, short hair, differed significantly from David's appearance, tall, bearded, long hair, in both the newspaper photo and lineup. This inconsistency seriously undermines the reliability of her later identification. In contrast, Wes immediately recognized Dawn, suggesting his identification was based on his observations during the crime rather than influenced by the courthouse setting. Now let's think about some additional identification scenarios you might encounter on an exam. 1. Post-charge voice identification. If after formal charges, police have a witness listen to recordings of several voices, including the defendant's, without the defendant being physically present, there's no Sixth Amendment right to counsel issue. But if the recordings all sound different, or officers suggest which voice belongs to the defendant, there could be due process concerns. 2. In-court identifications following suppressed out-of-court identifications. Remember that if an out-of-court identification is suppressed, a subsequent in-court identification is only admissible if the prosecution can establish an independent source. For example, if a witness had a clear, unobstructed view of the suspect for several minutes during the crime in broad daylight, this might constitute an independent source. 3. Photo arrays showing multiple photos of the same suspect. If police show a witness a photo array where the defendant appears multiple times but other individuals only appear once, this could be unnecessarily suggestive because it gives the witness multiple opportunities to select the defendant. So let's review what we've learned across both parts of our discussion on criminal identification procedures. 1. There are various types of identification procedures: lineups, show-ups, photo arrays, fingerprinting, DNA testing, and voice identifications. 2. The Sixth Amendment right to counsel attaches once formal adversarial judicial proceedings have begun. This determines whether a defendant has the right to have counsel present during identification procedures. 3. For lineups and show-ups that occur after charging, the defendant has a right to counsel's presence. For pre-charge lineups and show-ups, there is no such right. 4. Even after charging, there is no right to counsel for photo arrays, fingerprinting, or blood testing, unless the defendant is physically present. 5. The Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment protects against unnecessarily suggestive identification procedures that create a substantial likelihood of irreparable misidentification. 6. Courts examine the totality of the circumstances when determining whether an identification procedure violates due process. 7. If an out-of-court identification is inadmissible, an in-court identification is also barred unless the prosecution can establish an independent source for the identification. Remember that when analyzing identification procedure questions on an exam, you should systematically work through both the Sixth Amendment right to counsel issues and the 14th Amendment due process concerns. The timing of the identification and the specific procedure used are critical factors in your analysis. Let's walk through a step-by-step approach to tackling these questions on an exam. Number 1, identify the procedure. Is it a lineup, show-up, photo array, fingerprinting, DNA test, or voice identification? 2, determine the timing. Did the identification occur before or after formal adversarial proceedings began? This tells you whether the Sixth Amendment right to counsel has attached. 3, analyze the right to counsel issue. If formal proceedings had begun and it was a lineup or show-up with the defendant present, was counsel present? If not, the identification likely violates the Sixth Amendment. 4, examine the due process issue. Was the procedure unnecessarily suggestive? If yes, did this create a substantial likelihood of misidentification based on the totality of the circumstances? 5, consider the remedy. If there was a constitutional violation, the out-of-court identifications should be suppressed. For in-court identifications, determine if there's an independent source. 6, evaluate any policy arguments. Consider the reliability of eyewitness testimony generally and the importance of protecting against wrongful convictions based on misidentification. This methodical approach will help you identify all the relevant issues and avoid missing critical analysis points. One final note. It's important to remember that eyewitness identifications, while compelling to juries, are often unreliable. Factors like stress, weapon focus, where witnesses focus on a weapon rather than the perpetrator's face, cross-racial identification challenges, and memory contamination through suggestive procedures can all lead to mistaken identifications. These constitutional protections exist precisely because of the risk of wrongful convictions based on these errors. When writing your exam answers, demonstrating an awareness of these underlying policy concerns can strengthen your analysis. That's all we have for you today. We hope that you found these hypotheticals to be helpful examples of how to work through questions that involve criminal identification procedures. Thanks so much for watching. Please leave us a like and a comment and subscribe so you don't miss any future content. If you enjoyed this episode of the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@barexamtoolbox.com or Alison@barexamtoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at barexamtoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we are talking about criminal identification procedures. This is part 2 of our 2-part series. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess, that's me. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or Alison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.